This 1 hour presentation has been edited down from a 3 hour long-form conversation in order to synthesize the essential arguments regarding electromagnetic properties of Old World architecture. And even this was just scratching the surface. I hope you get as much out of listening to it as I did in revisiting and editing it. If you want to support my work as I continue to recover from pancreatic cancer, please like and subscribe to this channel, send thoughts and prayers for myself and my family, and if you are able to, kindly visit the GoFundMe at the link in the show notes. With a small donation, you will have access to over 6 months of writing, chronicling my journey as I overcome this horrible disease and return to full health. And we're just going to talk our way through this, Matt, okay? I haven't honed my presentation skills, so we're just going to go through it a little at a time here.
By the way, this drawing is one of my favorite. This image here is one of my favorites.
This cover image really is, I did do this collage, so I put my little handle on there. The idea of the cathedral being superimposed over the earth with its electromagnetic field surrounding the cathedral. And it's really, this was the crystallization really of the idea of what I was trying to get at, is that all living bodies have an electromagnetic field. So starting out with some quotes from our friend Albert Einstein. He says, "What we have called matter is energy. There is no matter." Now, so this is a very interesting quote because Albert Einstein also denied the existence of the ether. Next quote, "Light is nothing but a sound wave in the ether." So that right there, it's just worth pausing on, and just kind of, it's its own meditation, because we understand light as particles that go through empty space from point A to point B. But what this is saying is that there's no particle traveling. If we have an ether, if we have a medium, that light is a perturbation, it's a disturbance, an agitation of the etheric field. And that's what we'll get a little bit more into that as we go. So the idea that I'm trying to put forward is that Old World architecture has an electrical essence. So we see this sort of toroidal field around a living body, whether it be a human, tree, plant.
Yep. Why did they have us 6 feet apart? It was to separate our toroidal fields. Because the human body has a toroidal field that goes out 6 feet around it. And that's why, people, when you walk by someone, sometimes you don't even have to touch them. You get the goosebumps on the back of your neck, and that's your fields crossing. That's your energies crossing. And you're getting that vibe that maybe this isn't the right vibe I want to be in.
You're 100% right. And that shows how devious all of that really was. It was completely arbitrary, but it was also just straight up evil.
Yeah, it was just
force children to socially distance. All of that was just so harmful.
And it shows, but it's relevant to this, right? Because we are energy. We are full of it, and plasma, right? You look at the sun. The sun is just a giant ball of plasma.
So and we're going to get into this. So tell me if you can see my mouse.
Yes.
Around. Yeah. Okay, good. Because just that you said that the sun is a ball of plasma. Now the idea of this is that plasma is scalable. Plasma phenomena is fully scalable from the macro to the micro. The same type of phenomena happens at all levels. It's self-similar and it's fractal. So you have at the galactic scale, galaxies have a toroidal electromagnetic field. And we won't get too much into dark matter and dark energy and all of the things that modern physics has had to conjure up to explain why, for instance, the stars on the outermost flank of a galaxy spin around at the same rate as the stars on the inside, because gravity can't explain that. Centripetal forces would have this thing fly apart. So they had to come up with these phantom forces, such as dark matter, is pushing in on a galaxy to hold it together. The electric universe theory does not have that problem. So you have these toroidal fields around galaxies. You have it at the celestial scale around suns, and you have it at the planetary scale. So the Earth has its own electromagnetic field. Now, my understanding is that when we witness the aurora borealis, the northern lights, what we're seeing is where the electric field of the Earth is supercharged as it hits the Earth. So again, going back to this idea that the ancients in the olden times, the atmosphere was more highly electric charged, so more plasma phenomena was visible to our ancestors. So this again is from Ken Wheeler. This breakdown. So you have this 0 point. People talk about 0 point energy, right? How do we get perpetual and free energy? Well, the 0 point is where the torus folds in on itself and comes back out again. And so that's the dielectric point. The magnetic point, magnetism, is what happens out out here in the field. So the magnetism is the field outside of the 0 point dielectric. This is the toroid. The hyperboloid is what's in here. This is the hyperboloid, right? It's the hourglass on the inside. The anode is the magnetic field. The cathode is the dielectric 0 point. This can also be the magnetic field can also be associated with heat, and the dielectric 0 point can be associated with cold. And he makes this what I think is a really profound point, that it's the 0 point is light. That's the source. What we perceive as light is really illumination, and he makes that distinction, and it's really profound, and it's something that I'm just sitting with and kind of taking on as a meditation. But the idea that what we perceive as light is really illumination, and that light itself it's the source, and it's the nothing versus the everything of the magnetic field. So when we experience reality, we're experiencing the magnetic field opening up.
Okay. So it'd be the presence and absence of light.
It's the everything and the nothing.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. That's an interesting take on it.
So again, plants and trees are rooted in the electromagnetic field of the Earth just by their being rooted. Yep. Right? A tree doesn't have trouble maintaining its electromagnetic field in alignment with the Earth's, because it's rooted in the Earth, and that's the source of its life, and it'll never move from that as long as it's living. And an apple grows on the tree, right? So it's going to have a perfectly intact electromagnetic field when it's picked. Here, this is a bone to the flat Earth community, because I just think this is a super cool graphic. It's showing the plane of the realm, with the tree moving through the center of the mountain and then cycling back in on itself. And so I love this graphic, although I'm not a proponent, for the same reason that I'm not a proponent of flat apples. But that's all I'll say about that.
No, I like this. That was really interesting there, because and again, that gets into the whole as above, so below concept too. Yes. Which is a whole nother level to this, but
that's exactly it. And the alchemical principles behind cathedrals are very important to understanding this. Mm-hmm. So human beings, on the other hand, we're not rooted, right? And we're seeking a connection with divinity. We're trying to find ways to align our light body with the divine, with the Earth, but with the divine, with the source ultimately.
Well, that's why grounding is so significant, right? I mean, yep. I never believed in any of that, and honestly, for a good 35 years of my life, I would not take my shoes off. And it's like, I got brainwashed by the system to believe that, these are the best things ever for your feet. And Then all of a sudden you start taking your shoes off and you start walking around and you're like, oh, wow, there's
Yeah.
something too, that you feel that energy. You feel the connection come through you.
Yeah, the hippies, they were onto something with that one for sure. Going
Yep.
barefoot on the beach or in the grass.
Well, and that also leads you to think about, all the concrete that's out there,
Mhm.
all the asphalt that's out there that inhibits that, and the rubber on your shoes. And I think of all the rubber that's out there to inhibit connection and prohibit connection. So,
Yeah, and so you wonder why there's so much dis-ease. It's
yep.
just like everywhere you turn, we're disconnected from the source. And so
Yes.
this is what we're after, right? And I think, this search of old world architecture, I think in a lot of ways is this yearning that we have, and this, it's a nostalgia for something that, was just there just yesterday. It was still somewhat intact, or mostly intact even, not too long ago. And so we've been ripped out of that more sort of natural, and I like to call it the analog world,
Yes.
and
Yeah, and
removed
that's
the source.
that's been my draw to this. My draw to the old world is, I mean, the buildings are amazing, but it's that health side of it, right? That connection, that the positive frequencies, the connection with nature that we've lost. And and that's what I'm searching for, is to find out, how do we get humanity healthy again, on the
Yeah,
right path. Maybe not, it's not going to be through their system, it's going to have to be outside the system. But how do we get back to that old way where there were, connections, we were in tune with our realm, whereas today we couldn't be more disconnected.
yeah, and so what role can architecture play in this? Because there's a lot of different approaches. People use tuning forks. They use, what we talked about, entheogens, that, meditation, just walking, hiking. There's
Yep.
lots of different ways of getting back to it, but architecture plays an important role. So looking at the examples of the old world and what it was that they were doing can help us get to better tomorrows, I think.
Oh, I'm with you on that, absolutely.
So this idea here is that a magnet is an inside out AC generator, or you can say an AC generator is an inside out magnet. When I heard Ken talk about magnets being an inside out AC generator and vice versa, it's kind of like the light bulb went off, like figuratively and literally. It's like, oh, so magnets, by being magnets, are they have an electrical well, I'm going to say electromagnetic field that is aligned with a 0 point of a greater electromagnetic field,
The
right?
receptors, right?
Yeah, as a way of looking at it, they're drawing energy directly from the ether without combustion. There's no burning of fossil fuels needed. And so this diagram here kind of shows, how different forms of magnets can, you can manipulate the field with how you orient the magnets and the poles to one another. And it's just a simple experiment of taking a magnet and wrapping copper wire around it proves that electricity and magnetism are two sides of a coin. Where you have electricity, you have magnetism, and where you have magnetism, you have electricity. So now we looked at bricks, right? And this is straight from that Scientific American article, where they're able to manipulate just this simple clinker brick in such a way as to enable it to hold charge. So here again, our building's electric. There's this idea that within modern science that stars, and our sun in particular, are nuclear furnaces, right? And it's all held together by gravity, and it's churning out however many trillions of tons of uh, hydrogen atoms. And what the electric universe theory says is that's kind of a load of bunk. That stars are not nuclear furnaces. They're not, the heat is not being generated from within the star. And what they'll do is they'll point to the corona of the stars, and in our sun in particular, being many, many, many times hotter than the core.
Yep.
And so if the sun was a nuclear furnace, how come the hottest part isn't in the center? How come the hottest part is way out in the corona? And by far the hottest. And so what the electric universe proponents suggest is that stars are formed along pinch points of what are called Birkeland currents. Birkeland currents were named for a physicist of the late 1800s, I believe, named Christian Birkeland. And he did actual plasma experiments showing this stuff. And so that throughout the vastness of space, there are pairs of plasma filaments, again called Birkeland currents, that when they wrap around one another, they intensify, and so then you get stars along these pairs of filaments, and they refer to them as pearls on a string. The filaments being the string. And Walt Thornhill, he's sort of like the godfather of the Thunderbolts project, and he explains this eloquently. So I'd recommend people go and check out the work of Walt Thornhill.
Yeah, Matthew, and for anybody listening, I love the diagram that you have here at the bottom where it has, the two stars, and then it shows them basically as they're getting closer, and then almost as they link, right? And then they start spinning in almost it looks like a counterclockwise fashion until at the end, initially they start with two dots, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And then by the end of it, you've had them twist and merge into almost a yin yang sign.
Mm-hmm. Now, what those two dots are, are actual cross sections of these plasma filaments. Mm-hmm. So you can see it in the visual here, where you have, if you took a cross section here, you'd get this sort of owl-like form, right?
Yep.
And then as the filaments begin to twist around each other, you get this yin and yang twisting, swirling, like hurricane-like pattern.
And what's interesting about the magnetic one is it's almost like a bullseye, right? I mean, you have layers of circles, where in the plasma side, it's totally like you were saying, it's a swirl, yin yang pattern. It's a different perspective of it.
Yeah. And so if we can imagine for a moment that stars are powered from without by these circuits, by these plasma filaments called Birkeland currents, well, then it's kind of a game changer, because we go back to the images from earlier, where you have galaxies charging stars, charging planets, charging us.
Yep.
Right? You can see the self-similarity and the fractal nature of this. Oh. And so here's some further experimentation where, and maybe you've seen these ferrocell experiments, where they'll take just two sheets of glass and they'll put a ferrofluid, which is just like a super thin, highly viscous fluid, in the middle, and shine a light through. And then when you add a magnet to it, what emerges is really the conjugate nature of the universe. You see, without having to take mushrooms, you can see the nature of the geometry of the ether.
Yeah, I mean, that looks like the flower of life almost.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes. And again, when you look at this, okay, so this is a plasma formation. And so you can see again these owl eyes here again with this simple charge running through a copper wire in the iron filings, creating this owl-like field pattern. And then when you look at petroglyphs, and this is another case that they make, is that petroglyphs are a record of plasma formations that were witnessed all over the earth, which could help explain why the motifs of petroglyphs are so similar no matter where you go. And I believe it was Anthony Peratt that actually went and actually studied in situ petroglyphs and documented, showed that they face the same direction with, over great distances.
Really?
They'll have this similar carvings very far apart from each other, miles, hundreds of miles apart, but facing the same direction, which seems to suggest that they were recording something that they were seeing in the sky. And you see different ones, like Jacob's Ladder is another plasma formation. This is why I'm wearing this t-shirt. You see this, the stick man.
Yep.
And this image here is actually a plasma generated image in a laboratory.
Really?
Yeah. And it's how the stick man is represented in rock art all over the world.
Wow, this owl thing has got my head spinning now, because there's so much symbolism in the owl and so much use of owl symbolism in all over the place, that wow.
And for those who really want to go there, here is a
yeah, crop circle.
It is a crop circle of the owl eyes, and who's trying to tell us something.
It's like the owl eyes in the sun.
Right. I mean, look at this. It's like a pine cone or a sunflower pattern.
Yep.
Now, why would a pine cone or a sunflower grow the way it does? Because this is the nature of the geometry of the ether that is it's forming out of.
And that shape right there is, when I was looking down at the grass, that's what I would see, was just those perfect sacred patterns just repeated over and over. And it's just so amazing to see here and tie it in together, that but you see it everywhere. It's in all creation. And
just this crop circle. It's like you have the owl eyes and you have this pattern superimposed on one.
Exactly. Yep. Wow. Now, what's the upper right picture with the fingers and the two circles?
So this is how you derive these or generate these geometric patterns with the ferrocell experiment. Is you just apply a magnet to it.
Right over it. Okay, that's the magnet. Okay. Yeah. Yep, I see.
And so this one here, where you get the owl eyes, that magnet would have been just turned on its side. So it's on the plate like this. The plate is here.
Yep.
And you're getting the toroidal that way.
It's the yin and the yang. Yep.
Yeah.
The two sides of the energy field. Wow. That's so cool.
This is really cool, because back to my visit to the museum, the local museum in Ellensburg, I saw this pattern on the wall in a picture, and they've actually got actual petroglyphs in there that were taken from the Columbia River Gorge. So this image here actually came from right around me in the Columbia River Gorge.
Oh, that's so cool. Isn't it amazing when you find it locally? You get into the
yeah, because you realize you're connected to all of this directly, and it's all around us, hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, that's the thing. But many are blind to it and can't see it, and that's the problem. That's why I do this, is to try and let people see it, and hopefully we open a couple eyes.
So this is my ode to Walter Russell and his amazing book, Universal One. Matt, are you familiar with this book?
I haven't read it. I know who Walter Russell is, though.
I highly recommend it. I mean, I put this up here just to demonstrate that this is, I believe that this is what he was driving at. That gravitation doesn't explain the structure of the universe, but with gravitation, you need radiation. You need the yin and the yang, inhalation and exhalation, right? curving in and curving out, positive and negative charge. So that's what we're after here. And so just a quick counterpoint here, modern scientism denies the ether, confines electricity to wires fed by combustion, and claims the sun is a dangerous sort of disease.
Yeah.
So sacred buildings are aligned and attuned to the human form. So this is, I love this image. Again, not my artwork. This is attributed to DW down here. Hats off to you. It's a great collage showing different sacred structures and temples and how just in plan they align with the human body
And sacred geometry
in all our proportions.
Yes, it's amazing. And notice, where are the centers of these cathedrals? Right in the green, right in the heart.
Right.
And that's where all the people would be.
Yes.
Right. And then if you look where the purples are in most churches, I would imagine that's where the organ would be.
Oh, interesting.
Right. You're going to get the frequencies coming from the crown, basically.
Oh, and look at where the entrance is. It's like the womb.
Sacral. Yep.
Isn't that fascinating?
I'm with you. This is a great slide right here. This really lays it out and makes you see that there is more to these cathedrals than just, a stone building.
And look at where they have the choir is in the throat chakra.
Yep. The voice.
You can't make this up.
That is, wow. I've never, and I just before when we were talking and I was scrolling through, because I have pictures like this that shows the sacred geometric patterns in the different, and it had the human body, and I never even put the chakras together with the cathedral, because that's amazing. From entering in the womb area, going up through the stomach. Wow. So you're climbing the chakras as you get closer to the organs. Wow. That's beautiful. I love it. And the Solomon's Temple one is really interesting too, with the outbuilding by his feet.
Right. Interesting too. Yeah.
Great slide. Oh, I love that one.
So then we were talking about alchemy, and this image over here on the right is from a book that was actually recommended by Jay Widener, which I picked up. It was the most expensive book I ever bought, but I'm so glad I did. Called Natural Architecture, and they get into the alchemy of the sacred geometry of the cathedrals. And apparently the author is like not fully understood if this was the author. It was written in French. It was saved as a manuscript and passed down and somehow preserved. And then it was translated into English. But what I love about this image on the right there is that it shows the alchemist holding the model of the cathedral and examining it as a sacred work.
Yeah, that's a great. I'm just trying to look at all the intricate details. It's just such a detailed drawing too. And there's, the little flags up above. You've got the stars. It looks like pine cones. I don't know what the first flag is, but then you get into you've got the masonry tools.
They look like acorns.
Yeah. So it's almost.
None of this stuff is by accident, and it's all so intentional. And that's what this tells me. Every piece of it is considered as a part of the whole. And again, this self-similar fractal replication of each part relating back to the whole in this really highly charged, resonant, harmonic whole. There's a book out there called Pillars of the Earth. It's a novel. What's the guy's name? I have it on my shelf back here. Can't remember the author's name right now. Ken Follett, I believe. And he makes a big fuss in the preface about how he spent, I don't know, 10 or 20 years traveling around to cathedrals and studying cathedrals, and he really wanted to write a novel about that was based on, the story of how a cathedral was built. And it's really good storytelling. But how he describes the actual building of the cathedral was this really kind of cartoonish, like trial and error. Like, well, they tried this, it didn't work, so they did something else. Well, his daughter was sitting in the structure after, the shell was up, and she looked up and said, "Dad, wouldn't a window look really great there?" And her name was Rose, so now we call them Rose Windows. And it was just like, come on.
That's
Like,
it.
I've come to the point where I think cathedrals, they're, first of all, they're divinely inspired. Second of all, we have no idea what we're looking at. That's how I feel. Like, whenever you see, drawings, you never see like actual construction drawings. Like, how the hell did these things go together? How do you build a foundation and start erecting columns out of, I don't know, pink granite and marble that are going to hold up this crystalline edifice that's, hundreds of feet into the air with all of its flying buttresses, like the highly advanced engineering and architecture that goes into this, together with all of these alchemical principles and sacred geometry. It's so mind-boggling. And I really do believe that, we talk about like levels of consciousness. We're here. We're sort of like, we might be like 2 or 3 steps up from being NPC, but we got a long way to go. Like, I think that these structures were built by people with
they're master craftsmen.
higher consciousness.
Yeah,
I think they had a higher consciousness.
I agree. I think they were at a higher frequency. They were in tune with something that we've lost connection to. And I I've been listening a lot, and I sound like a broken record to the people that listen to the show, but the guys over at Operation Red Pill have been talking about the trivium and the quadrivium.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the more I listen to that and the more I start thinking about it and the way they've taken geometry out of education and pushing away from music and things like that, and the arts, it's a perversion. So anyone that's, it's one of those where we have to try and find a way. And that's, again, what I was talking about before. My mission in this with the old buildings is to find that connection, right? Find out how they did it, or why they did it the way they did to benefit humanity. And at what point was it that they decided, okay, now we're not going to do this anymore?
Yeah. Yes. And I think that we have some ideas.
And we're close. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, when they destroyed the old world. So, what we have in cathedrals are self-similar fractal patterns found throughout all sacred structures, really. But I think best exemplified in these cathedrals. And here's some examples of Exeter, Gloucester, Bath, and Reims.
And what's funny too, Matthew, is that, here, all these pictures are European, right? Mm-hmm. And when people think about these structures, they're like, oh yeah, those are European structures. Well, then you go over to India, you see similar structures over there. You go to China, you go to South America, you go to Africa, and you start seeing similar structures all over the world. And it's not just in Europe, like we're led to believe.
I've got some images coming up of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, and it's just like this. And
I've been in St. Patrick's, and man, is that a beautiful cathedral.
Mm-hmm.
Oof. Yeah, I wish I went in it with the eyes I have now, though.
Exactly. Yeah. Speaking of that, I studied architecture in Newark, New Jersey, and it was a stone's throw. My architecture school, it was a stone's throw from, I believe it's Sacred Heart Cathedral. And in Newark, you can look that up. It's breathtaking.
Yep.
And I just, I still had the blinders on.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't appreciate what was right there. Like I really do want to go back and just spend some time, because it's world-class architecture. And I
Yeah.
didn't go in it once. And I'm embarrassed to say that, because I
Hey,
was still into like the Bauhaus and like Corbusier and modern architecture. I thought that was cool. Little did I know.
well, field trip.
Yes. So, and just as in nature, self-similar fractal patterns are found throughout.
Oh, this is
And
great. Yeah, my
so if you hold
friend,
these side by side, a picture starts to emerge of, these cathedrals are built with natural order, natural law, and the natural exquisite beauty of just the logos that comes with adhering to nature's principles, right? So we have Lichtenberg currents, which shown in the middle here is this wood engraving technique of attaching two electric cables to a block of wood that's wet with water and running a current, and then it creates fractal Lichtenberg figures that look just like canyons at the macro scale, and then they make these beautiful sculptural pieces. And again, thinking about the fact that plasma phenomena is fully scalable from the macro to the micro. So you have crystals that self-replicate. There's self-similar fractal patterns in these crystals. The Mandelbrot set. Everybody's probably sat there with a video running of Mandelbrot set, getting dizzy, but seeing these patterns repeat over and over and over again. It's just a very simple equation that derives it at this infinite variation. Fern leaves, ice crystals. It just
yeah,
goes on and
and
on.
and these, I mean, this Lichtenberg pattern really gets me, man, because you see it, and when you're in the electric universe, you start listening to people, and I know Aria Sulin really pushes it, that you look at the Grand Canyon and it's essentially just a Lichtenberg pattern.
Yes.
It's fried.
Yeah.
And anyone that wants to see more pictures of this, my on Instagram, Tartari Ann had just put, I think, probably 20 pictures out there of the Lichtenberg. So
Yeah.
you want to
Well,
see it
you can just
in
hover over the Southwest on Google Maps and zoom in and out, and you're just going to come across one Lichtenberg pattern after another, and
yep.
it does look like that whole region has been fried.
Yeah,
And
it's basically the Rockies West, that whole area up and down the Rockies and around the Grand Canyon, and you go down into New Mexico and Arizona. It's all,
yeah, so
and what else do you see out there? It's all red,
huh,
right? All the land is oxidized. It's just, it's red. It's almost like it's been burnt.
like Mars.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
Valles Marineris on Mars. It's the scar across the face of Mars is a ginormous, it's many times the size of the Grand Canyon. And if you really look at it, it looks like a plasma thunderbolt just raked itself across the surface of Mars.
Yep.
And if you really, when you get into that, it's fun because modern planetary astrophysicists would say that they would say that that was as a result of water erosion that once, when the Mars once had water. Well, I'm not denying that Mars once had water, but that canyon system, fractal canyon system, doesn't have outlets. Like the branches of the canyons just they create these Lichtenberg branches and they just end. And there's no outlets where the water would have gone. The water would just kind of fill up.
It would have pooled, right?
It would have pooled.
Yeah.
So it suggests that maybe it's not from water erosion, and perhaps again it goes back to the myths of the ancestors and the idea of the thunderbolts of the gods. So I'm showing these images to again, just to really emphasize this idea that these sacred buildings are following natural patterns.
Yep.
Right. And here we have, from the outside, the stone and metallic spires and fractal antennas found throughout sacred structures, pulling down that etheric energy.
And then I also notice on a lot of these is that they always have, it's not stained glass, but that large window in the front that has a ornate geometric pattern in it, the circle, which would, on some modern, they would put like a clock in there or something,
You mean Rose's window?
Yeah, Rose's window in the middle. It's like, it's amazing. And so you think about it now, why would they put that there? It's not for decoration, right? I mean, it has to have a function. These buildings are functional. They're not, just a plan that they put together. These are living, breathing structures.
Yeah. So if what I'm saying is true, that these structures are hyper focusing these electromagnetic currents, let's say, right? And placing it in, and you have on the inside, you have this sort of fractal crystalline structure made of conductive materials, by the way, right?
Yep. Heavily conductive, by the way.
What's that?
Heavily conductive, by the way.
Heavily conductive materials, piezoelectric properties. You have the pipe organ, like we've discussed, right? In the head chakra.
Yep.
Pumping this vibration through this crystalline structure. Well, that rose window placed where it is going to act as an amplifier.
Yes.
Sending all of that good juju out into your community. And so here, again, Tesla proved that electricity can be generated by connecting heaven and earth and transmitting said electrical energy over great distances wirelessly. So the question that we keep bumping up against is this old world technology.
That is the $1 million question, isn't it? Right? I mean, because you look at it and it's not, though, when we look back, because looking at these old pictures and hearing about it, it's been around, it's been known. And Tesla wasn't the originator of it, right? I mean, Tesla got his work from others.
That's what I understand. Not to take anything away from him, but
no.
Did he come up with all of these ideas, or did he comprehend all of these ideas? And, and again, we discussed last time how, all the patent offices, United States patent offices burned down twice,
not once,
in the 1800s.
Twice.
So who designed what and was lost twice over in the 1800s. So yeah, give it to Tesla or what have you.
Well, and we see that pattern over and over again, right? They have a character, so to speak, that they assign all of these roles to.
Yeah.
And it repeats throughout history.
Same with the architects. I would love to do a podcast with you where we just talk about the made up architects.
And
we just go around and identify.
I've been looking into like
Burnham
and Root,
yes,
from Chicago, because those guys just built everything. Every park in America, every building. They built thousands of buildings.
Well, it's Olmsted gets every park, and he was
that's it. Olmsted
journalist.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what. Well, Burnham wasn't even an architect. And then all of a sudden he's credited with building a mansion for like the richest guy in Chicago, and then marries his daughter.
And we talked about how Paxton was. He's attributed to all the Crystal Palaces, and he was the gardener.
He's gardener. Yeah. But he designed in what, 2 weeks?
Right. The London Crystal Palace.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he designed it in 2 weeks, and they built it in 8 months.
So we think that they knew how to channel etheric energy. That's what we think.
Well, and that's interesting too, because I've seen and I've heard people talk about that there were cell phones back in the day.
Yeah, I've seen, well, I've seen the pictures of the two women next to the fire hydrant, and they were connecting that coil, and
Yeah.
yeah, back in 1900 or
Yeah.
so.
So, I mean, who's to say that this isn't just a found technology? And I think that's what all this is. I think, in this realm that we're in, everything's been created already. We're just recreating it.
Yeah, I think we're in a process of rediscovery.
Yep.
I put this picture of the Fresnel lens up here because I just, these are just mind bending. Um, they're sculptures. They're just this like wizardry of engineering. They're marvels. I was in Lisbon, Portugal for my brother's wedding a few years ago, and they have a Fresnel lens museum right there in Lisbon, and I spent a few hours in there. It just blew my mind. But it's just the the ability of a Fresnel lens to throw light over great distances. I think that takes a profound understanding of the nature of light, and not seeing it as, again, like modern science looks at light as particles, going from point A to point B through empty space, as opposed to, um, what the plasma physics point to, that light is a perturbation of the ether,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there is a point source, and again, going back to the idea of the 0 point, but that light as we perceive it is really illumination, and the
Yeah, and
source of light. Mhm.
it seems like that. I mean, that is like one of those concepts that you'd almost see it like the Colossus of Rome of Rhodes. One of these massive lighthouses. And when you think about it and you hear about the old lighthouses, there's talk of red mercury being involved
Mhm.
and things like that would help with some of these processes and some of this illumination and such. But yeah, it's another one that's a mystery to me, because I don't see all these lighthouses just strictly being a beacon of light for approaching ships.
And here's the thing that gets me, Matt, is, let's say we're just batshit crazy, right?
Quite
Let's say
possible.
we're we're bored. We've done too many mushrooms. Whatever. We're just like off on this crazy tangent, and all of these buildings that to us look like old world structures all across this country, much of which was burned down or torn down deliberately, that has all of these exquisite properties that we can't do anymore, and all this kind of stuff. If it's true that all of it was built as they say it was, then this nation had a renaissance of breathtaking proportions that lasted for about 20, maybe 30 years,
Yep.
where we built the most extraordinary structures all over the place in the most remote locations, without, barely the infrastructure there to get, just to get from point A to point B, and with the most rudimentary tools,
Yep.
while people were trying to figure out how to just eat, scratch a living out of the soil,
Yeah,
or
if anybody's
mine
wondering
or
about
farm.
this, go check
Mhm.
out old Utah. That's a
Yes.
mind-blowing idea. All those
Yeah, Salt
Mormon.
Lake City.
Yep.
And so if we're completely off the rails, and the the Wikipedia narrative is true, or the narrative as distilled through Wikipedia, then what happened? What happened to this renaissance? What that should be like our great grandfathers, and that built all this stuff, and we should be celebrating this. It should be in all of our stories. It should be in
Yep.
all of our movies. It should be in all of our literature, and all of our, the legends and myths of our time. We should be intimately familiar with this stuff. So where did everybody go? Where did all the stories go? Where did all the
Well,
knowledge
instead,
go?
instead, who do we get? We get J.P. Morgan. We get the Rockefellers. We get these people, Carnegie's. These are the characters that they feed us
Yes.
as to the, responsible for all of this.
and worse yet, they label it Gilded Age and get us to hate it and look at it with disdain, which is what happened to me as an architecture student. I would look at this stuff, and now I think back, if I had this kind of like tug of war going on inside of myself, I'd look at it and be like, damn, that's really beautiful, and be like, oh, but it's the capitalists.
Yep.
It's bad. And so what if they tear it down? Right.
Yeah, there's such a dichotomy to that, you know, that you're like, oh, on one side, fuck the capitalists, you know, but at the other hand, it's like, maybe did they even build this? Or are
Did
they
they
just
even build
claiming
it?
it?
Yeah.
Did they found it?
And if and it's much more interesting to look at it as old world, as part of another iteration of whatever civilization was here before it was seized upon.
Yeah, and I tend to lean on, you know, if things were reset, right, you're going to build on what was previously there, or
Yeah.
use what was previously there first, and
Mm-hmm.
then adapt it to what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, for people just to completely blow off the idea that there have been resets over time, and that, you know, things have been manipulated over time, and that there have been essentially, you know, the slate's been blanked in certain areas, and you can rebuild, and we've seen
Mm-hmm.
that throughout the 1800s with the fires. And that's recent history. We're not even going back into ancient history. We're just staying in the modern times, and you see it. Now, magnify that or multiply that for thousands and thousands of years. How many times could it have happened? How many resets have we been involved in? And we
Right.
just really don't know.
Right. And Plato talked about civilization being cyclical. We are trained to think that it's linear, and that we're the cat's meow, and the latest and greatest, and everything was leading up to our iPhone in our pocket. And I understand it's, for many, and even for myself in the beginning, it seemed a bridge too far to think, well, all the textbooks are wrong. And all right, fuck the textbooks, because whatever about school, but all the literature is wrong, and the basically the historical record, and how could there be such a sense of like a collective amnesia that there's just no recollection of it? Well, then you get into these palatial orphanages and insane asylums all across the landscape, these remote locations where there's sprawling palaces with exquisite architecture that are stuffed full of crazy people. Where'd all the crazy people come from? And then you get into the orphan trains, that were redistributing children across the landscape to any farmer that would take them. And what was going on there? And the baby
incubator babies, right?
incubator babies at world fairs. um, it gets strange. It gets in it, as we discussed a little bit last time, it can be a little dark, and it's unsettling, and sometimes you just have to take it in digestible bites.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because if you present the whole story as, we start seeing it unravel, that's when you get, oh, you're just crazy. That's just totally insane. But when you start piecing together asylums and orphanages and world fairs where these folks would learn the ways that they're going to have to live going forward, it doesn't seem so crazy. And that when you start talking or looking at firsthand accounts of people at the fairs and saying that, yeah, they walked around like they were under a spell.
Right.
Well, that's because they probably have no clue where they are or what they're doing here.
That's because they're under a spell.
Yeah. So they're so disoriented that, you've just taken, it's like taking us and dropping us in the middle of the desert or the rainforest and saying, yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, you're looking around like, oh shit, what do I do? Like, I don't know what's poisonous, what's not. I don't know what's going to kill me, what's not. Yeah. I don't know what's going on here. It's going to take you a
we're all
while.
under a spell.
Yep.
We're all completely under a spell. And not only that, it's like, how do you tell somebody that's like maybe living in the suburbs that, hey, do you know that there was like a star fort here before? It's like, well, it's not here now. I got shit to do.
Yep.
So speaking of roses windows, they're masterpieces of cymatic design identified with cathedrals all around the world. And again, my contention is that these lovely devices are devices, and they're acting as amplifiers for all of that energy that is being, gathered and channeled by the cathedral itself. I put this image here because this idea has been floating around, hearkening back to Ewar's videos of the magnetron, or showing the magnetron, and how just by the geometry of this device, and in this case, a spinning cathode at the center of it. Remember, we talked about the cathode and the anode. Well, when this spins, and this is still just by the way of this self-similar fractal geometry going around the inside of the circle, it generates charge. This is generating charge. These exist inside of every microwave.
Yep.
So, looking at rose windows, and again, where do we see this kind of thing in nature? And it's just like the flower of life is the
where you
foundation
got
of
me.
sacred
This
geometry.
is Dr. Emoto.
Mhm.
Oh, yes, I love it. Go on.
Yes. Again, just re-emphasizing the case that these sacred structures are following nature's rules, following natural principles and natural order. And you can come up with all of the Platonic solids starting with the single point. And I just love that. I love that idea. You start with a point, and that's the void. And then you go out equidistant from there, and you get a circle, and you overlap the centers of two circles, and you get the Vesica Pisces. And it just goes on and on, in self-similar fractal replication. You end up with the seed of life, the flower of life, and before you know it, you have Metatron's cube.
Yep.
And from there, the geometry, it jumps from 2-dimensional to 3 dimensions. It jumps off the page. It extrudes, and this is the beauty of the Platonic solids, in addition to the fact that they all fit within a sphere where the vertices all touch the edge of the sphere. They have that in common, but how they all are just extruded from intersecting lines on this Metatron cube, which comes from the fruit of life, connecting the centers of the fruit of life shapes.
Which is also the pattern that we see in our star forts.
Which is the patterns that we see in sacred structures across the realm.
All across, yep. It's the basis for it, at least, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the foundation. And when you start, it's like, I remember when I was studying in architecture school, and you take your architecture studio class, spend all your time there. You're trying to come up with a concept for a project or a model, and students would come in with all sorts of wild things, and we're in a sense, like, our minds were, I wanted to say polluted, but really it's just like overloaded with what is presented as like the cutting edgest of architecture, with this deconstructivist stuff. And you go from modern architecture in our modern epoch, go from modern architecture with all its brutalism to this postmodernism with all its anything goes, pulling elements from everywhere and just mashing them together into whatever Philip Johnson type stuff, and then you get into this deconstructivist stuff, all the way up to like the Holocaust museums, and they're intentionally designed to create disharmony within the human spirit. Right? You find that in contemporary public sculptures that are put into town squares and cities all in Europe and the United States. These really kind of like jaggedy, just dejected looking sculptures. And to me, again, this is all part of the programming.
Yep.
And so you're getting all this like input as an architecture student. You come into studio, and it's like, where do I begin? It's like, well, this crumpled up tinfoil. This is the inspiration, and now I'm gonna build a hospital around this. And this is what students are getting. This is the way their minds are being formed in architecture. universities all over the place. And now I find that to be such a shame, because something as simple as, starting with the flower of life, it's such a simple concept, easy to learn, lifetime to master. You get the infinite variety of nature out of this, like out of a point in a circle. It's, how profound is that?
Yeah, and going back to what we talked about before, it goes back to the math, right? And them changing that in Common Core math, getting away from what's natural and giving you this thing to just disorient and take you away from the natural way of things, of operations.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I get it. I really believe in this because of you look into Dr. Emoto's studies and you just think about, in general, negative thoughts, negative words, it has an impact.
Yes.
Positivity, positive thoughts, positive words, they have an impact on you. And that's true with everything. And we found that it's true with water, it's true with plants. It's been proven time and time again that our words it's vibrations coming out of our mouth, it's frequency coming out of our mouth that produces these sounds, and it has an impact on everything around us.
Yes, and water does have memory.
Yes.
And how does water have memory? It's the resonance of the vibration, positive or negative vibration, that's being sent to the water, that's then frozen, proving through experimentation that anybody can do, where by sending negative thoughts and feelings, just thoughts and feelings to water, will negative ones will create really dissonant looking crystals. Positive loving emotions will create beautiful, exquisite crystals. And again, going back to Ken Wheeler, he talks about the why, which is the H2O molecule. The memory is held in the space between the atoms. It creates a perfect the molecule creates a perfect 108-degree triangle, which when you break it down and strike the line from the apex down to the bottom, you create I would just put it this way simply: embedded in the geometry of the water molecule is a perfect representation of phi, of the Fibonacci golden ratio. And so it's a perfect antenna to carry harmonics, to carry memory, to carry a resonant vibration, right? Which I guess is, when you get down to it, is what memory is in some way.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's what we're learning. It seems to be, and the crystalline structures are just amazing in the water as you see the different, like you were saying, different words, different emotions that we put into this. It's a phenomenal study. So anybody that hasn't checked it out, and Dr. Emoto is not the only guy that's done it. There's a lot of people that have done it. And you can look at it different ways too. You can look at it not only in the water, but you can look at it when they play church bells, and you can look at the effect that has on water. You can look at the organs, and they all tend to have a positive effect on the body.
Yeah. And speaking of organs,
yes, look at these beasts.
Pipe organs are marvels of instrumentation, sending sonic vibrations throughout cathedrals, with the rose windows acting as amplifiers.
Because what did we see before? Before, we saw that the organ is on one end and the rose window is on the other. And as it travels down, it's going to amplify.
Yeah. Yes.
And the size, the sheer size of these organs, most people have gone to their local church and they've seen a church organ, a normal size one. These things, some of the pipes are up to like 100 feet long.
I've heard or read that some of these create up to 40,000 tones, and some of which are inaudible to the human ear. Why would you go through all that trouble and expense and cost and labor and everything to create tones that are inaudible if it wasn't, if there wasn't some other purpose behind that?
Yeah, that's interesting. And then, well, an interesting story about organs too, with the St. Louis Fair and St. Louis World Fair in 1904. They had a huge organ brought in from California for the fair, and the maker of the organ went bankrupt making that organ for the fair. So they made the organ for the fair, gave it to the fair, and then went bankrupt and went out of business. It's like, very interesting.
It gets curiouser and curiouser.
Yep.
Well, so what did Tesla say? If we want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration.
Yep.
Right. And so here again, here cymatic patterns are generated by planets, which is shown on the left, by musical notes in the center there, and even cross-section of DNA. We see cymatic patterns everywhere in nature that, coincidentally or not, look an awful lot like rose windows. Yeah. And then as a bonus, the harmonic vibrating labyrinths on the floors of cathedral are a wonder to behold.
Yeah, and you see those resemble computer pieces, right? Mm-hmm. They
circuits. They're circuits.
They are a full circuit. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, those buildings, man.
Here's
here we go.
Our forts. So once upon a time, cities, entire cities were cymatic. Isn't that just breathtaking to think that the old city states that, like, in our sort of like popular imagination, were just like these feuding fiefdoms and, you know, all the kind of like negative connotation that goes along with it. And it's just, when you actually step back and look at the inception of many cities throughout Europe and elsewhere. Again, this book that we've been looking at, Cities of the World, one after another, and you realize that, holy smokes, these were the original layout of these cities was as like cymatic forms, with often a cathedral at the center of it and water running as a current through it and under it. And running water, we know, creates electrical current. So it's just, again and again, this idea that the old world structures, from the smallest aspect to the actual layout of the city themselves, had these natural patterns that really look like they're channeling electromagnetic energy.
Yeah, and if it wasn't a cathedral in the center, it was usually a water tower.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so again, when we look at conductivity and it all falls right into line.
Yes. Beautiful.